a very active Friday afternoon as we watch a hurricane approaching the Louisiana coast, and we're looking for a transition to much colder conditions across the U.S. in about 1 to 2 weeks. Hurricane Delta about to make landfall this Friday afternoon. We can see that that's a high-end Category 2 storm with 95-knot sustained winds. Central pressure 963 millibars. That is not in the range for a strong hurricane. That's typically what we see with the lower-end hurricanes. And there's the movement. It will be making landfall as a hurricane around 6 o'clock this evening. It will be grazing the Lake Charles area, and then we'll move up into the northeast part of Louisiana, into northern Mississippi, and towards Nashville. Here's the past 4 hours of infrared satellite imagery. We can see that there is no well-defined eye. We do know that there is one present, but it is covered by what we call this central dense overcast. The colder convection tops, those are starting to approach the coast now, so we should see the coastal regions getting into the thick of it over the next few hours. The Dvorak imagery is where we can actually divide the temperature regimes into specific bands, and this gives us an idea of what's happening with the storm. This confirms that we do have that central dense overcast signature, no well-defined eye, and that puts us in the T4 range. A quick look at Wikipedia's article on the Dvorak technique shows that the T4 number is encompassing most of the Category 1 and Category 2 storms. And from what we saw there of the central pressure, that is, well, at least at the time of the observation, it was around 970, but it is trending towards weaker numbers. So, we're certainly in the Category 2 range. So based on what I'm seeing, right at the moment when we're recording this, I would suspect we're seeing winds of about 85 to 90 knots sustained in the storm. Now, the Lake Charles radar is still damaged from the effects of Laura back on the 27th, I think it was. So we're going to use the Houston radar. But we do see a well-defined eye right there. And this also confirms we have north-northeast movement. So the Texas coast looks like it can breathe a sigh of relief. Lake Charles is going to have to batten down the hatches over the next few hours. There's the inner eye wall. That looks like it's moving in very quickly. So probably by the time we have this uploaded and we start getting into the early evening hours, that inner eye wall should be ashore. As far as the winds, the GFS has actually done pretty well on handling that wind field. And we're looking at wxcharts.com, which has got this great cumulative gust graphic. So let's bring that hurricane inland. There we go. Now, we're not going to be too concerned with the lateral placement. I think there's a little bit of error still, and we'll have to see how that resolves on the radar. But the north-south placement is going to be dominated mostly by the conversion of the wind field into turbulent flow through frictional effects. And I do think the models do a fairly good job with that. So what this is telling me is that right along the coastal regions, you can see we've got that dark gray, mostly on the right quadrant. That's 130, 140 kilometers per hour. So that's going to be near 100 miles an hour. These are gusts, not sustained winds. On the left side, very light purple, 120 kilometers an hour, so that's going to be up about 80 miles an hour or so. Then the other area we're concerned with is along Interstate 10. These are the populated areas, Lake Charles to Lafayette. On the right side of the track, we've got some light grays coming into that corridor, so that's going to be gusts of about 80 to 85 miles an hour. On the left side, around Lake Charles, Lake Charles is down there, slightly weaker. Those are going to be gusts to about 60 to 70. And that's because the forward speed of the storm is subtracted out. Then as we get further up north, frictional effects kind of really dominate, and we start getting into the 60 to 70 mile an hour range. And by the time it gets up to Memphis and Little Rock, oranges, which puts it at about 40 miles an hour. So it should rapidly be torn apart. But right there along Interstate 10 down at the coast, some strong winds, and that likely will take down a lot of the power lines. So you'll want to be prepared, have your cell phones charged, all that if you're down in that region. There's how things look in the southeastern U.S. this afternoon. Of course, Hurricane Delta coming inland, and that will head right through Louisiana through tonight. I do still see somewhat of a stationary front across the Gulf states, dividing slightly drier air from the moist surge coming up from the lower latitudes. You can see those dew points, 77 to 78, and mid-70s coming inland, but not quite reaching up to the Interstate 20 corridor. Further north, we have the outgoing polar high, giving us mild conditions across Virginia and North Carolina, and we've got this ridge extending westward into Arkansas and Texas. South of that ridge, a lot of inflow from the east into the hurricane. North of that, divergence and the southerly flow heading into the northern plains and the Gulf Coast region. And we can see that little frontal feature right through there, southern Georgia, southern Alabama. And elsewhere, it looks like the cloud field dominated by outflow. That storm kind of being sheared apart somewhat, and a lot of the upper level moisture heading towards the northeast. Couple of outer spiral bands making their way inland into Louisiana, and of course the inner spiral band about to make landfall. In the northeastern U.S., the cold air advection pattern has subsided. There still is a little stratocumulus around, looks like north of Montreal to Quebec City into Maine, and in further out over the Great Lakes, looks like there's a ridge. You can see that clockwise turning of the winds in that area, and then as you go further west, we get into the warm air advection across Wisconsin and Minnesota. Well, for whatever reason, we're not getting any data from Canada, so we'll take a look at the map using the U.S. stations, and everything up north of the border is going to be a guess for now. Now, it does look like the warm sector has made its way through the western Great Lakes. Temperatures coming up into the 70s. There are some cool readings, but that's due to the influence of the slightly cooler lake waters. But you can see right here from Cleveland to Buffalo and to Rochester and Albany, there's a definite cool down. Like if you're driving from Boston, you start out with a cool 58. That's definitely part of the polar air mass. Doesn't get much warmer out around Syracuse, Rochester 60, and then we start warming up and we hit 73 at Erie, and we're even up to 80 around South Bend, Indiana. So I don't know, we could probably bring that front a little further south since we are still kind of warming up between here and here. So maybe a proper placement on that front would be something like that. Anyway, that's just something to think about there. And then you can see the moist axis pretty much running up through Missouri, 60s dew points flowing up to the Quad Cities, up to Columbia, Missouri, and into southern Illinois there. So that's all the moisture coming northward. And for the northwest, you can ignore this continental tropical air mass mark. That was an error. But the cold air coming down through the Dakotas, and things look quiet out in the northwestern U.S. That's a relief with this hurricane that we're dealing with. However, it does look very stormy off the Pacific coast. Yep, this is what cold advection looks like over the ocean. A lot of open cell stratocumulus there. And the cold front. Warm front probably running up through Vancouver, kind of like that. So this is probably what's going to be heading into Washington later today over the weekend. Things looking pretty quiet in the southwest states. Some of this is probably associated with that shortwave that we looked at yesterday that was over California. Well, clear skies have returned to that area, and let's check out the satellite imagery off the coast of California. And I think it would be a good idea to go to the water vapor imagery. So let's do that. Because sometimes what we see is a lot of low cloud, and since they have high albedo, it can be very hard to see really what's going on in the mid and upper levels. And what we do see is a vortex off the California coast. Looks like a little cutoff low. So probably some jet energy running about like that, and then the main jet, of course, well, further up north than that, but it's up there off the coast of Washington. So, yeah, this cutoff low could have some effect on California over the weekend. And looks like it's already bringing clouds into the San Francisco area. Yeah, I'll try to pull up Canada real quick. There's Vancouver, latest observation 1540. There's some sort of major outage going on. Let's try Toronto, CYYZ. They've been down since 15Z also, so that looks bad. Some sort of telecom outage going on. And there's the southwestern U.S. Looks almost like yesterday. Heat low in the Colorado River Valley there. Cooler at Vegas, 83, but Phoenix up to 90. And on the California coast, some of that marine stratus making it into the coastal regions. But yeah, it looks actually pretty cool in the San Joaquin Valley. Well, a good place to start looking at the weather this weekend is the dynamics. This is the 500 millibar heights and vorticity. And we do see off the California coast that cutoff low. And we do see the very stormy conditions off the Washington coast. So moving forward, that's a fast-moving cutoff low coming onto the, looks like that's heading for South California, San Diego. So that'll be in the LA, San Diego area during the day tomorrow. Looks like that goes pretty far south, so the effects will probably be mostly in the San Diego area. And up north, tomorrow morning, very strong shortwave coming into the Seattle area. That'll move quickly eastward, so I'd expect some rain in that part of the country. And that moves quickly into the Montana, Saskatchewan area. Very strong dynamics associated with that. And that heads right for Minnesota, Iowa, and the Great Lakes towards Monday. So a lot of active weather in the north part of the U.S. And then down south, what are we expecting? Well, there's the circulation of Delta coming inland, and that pretty much recurves up towards West Virginia. And then just for a quick look at next week, we'll look at the 850 millibar temperature anomaly. And we can see the progression of systems from west to east. You can see that strong front coming into the Pacific Northwest there. Ahead of that, some strong downslope in Montana. That's definitely bringing the temperatures up about maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. And let's see. Yeah, there goes that front Sunday through the northern plains. Part of it pushes down into Texas. That's a Pacific front heading southeastward. And looks like that front stalls down in that region. Another reinforcement of cold air. This is mixed in with some western Canadian air. Most of that heads for the northeast, as we would expect. And then it looks like it gets much colder up in northern Canada. This is a major shift. You can see that it's about 15 Celsius. That's about 25 Fahrenheit below normal at 850. And I can tell you what's causing that. This is a forecast snow depth chart. This is what we have today. What do we see here? Very little snowfall. You could drive from Alberta to Alaska and not see any snow. A few bands here and there through Manitoba, Nunavut, and yeah, of course, up there in the northern Hudson Bay region, you do pick up snow. But watch what happens over the next week. We get a very active storm track through Canada, and we end up dumping vast amounts of snow. This is 10 to 15 inches. And by the time it's done, by midweek, we've got about 10 to 15 inches of new snow on the ground across a very vast area. Well, that's going to have an effect because that's going to radiate out a lot of heat. It's going to insulate the ground from the overlying air mass and start generating polar air, which should be carried southward. So I think we're going to see a cool down in about a week or two. See that right there? Now we have a ton of snow out there, and as a result, if we have a lot of cold air up here, that's going to shift the storm track down in here, and we have the potential to deposit a lot more snow just north of that track. And by the end of that period, most of Canada covered by fresh snow, except for the Toronto area, Saskatoon, and Vancouver. So this is going to represent a major pattern shift and likely kick us a little ways into winter. Okay, that's all I got for this edition of Forecast Lab. A quick check of that hurricane. We don't have the new bulletin from NHC yet, but there it is on the radar, very fast-moving storm, and as I record this, the inner eye wall looks like it's only about 50 or 60 miles from the coast. So weather is going downhill in southwestern Louisiana, and that's definitely not good news for Lake Charles. So we will hope for the best. Okay, take care, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.